In 1888, tens of thousands of British sheep started running in fear from something. What caused the Great Sheep Panic? There was something very strange about the evening of November 3, 1888. For farmers in Oxfordshire, England, the event that unfolded would leave them feeling very uneasy. It would become better known as the Great Sheep Panic of 1888. At around 8 p.m. that evening, a sheepdog belonging to a farmer near the city of Reading alerted its master to a commotion outside. The farmer emerged into the pitch darkness to hear the bustle, running feet and panicked bleats of his flock of sheep. Having broken through their pens, they bolted, running in frenzied fear across the open fields, leaving destroyed property and fences in their wake. The next morning, the sheep were finally located, scattered throughout the neighboring fields where they stood anxiously huddled in corners. Some were found miles away, panting with terror beneath the hedges that surrounded the fields. If this was strange, the next discovery was even more bizarre. The farmer was not alone. Across the surrounding area, spanning 200 miles, other farmers were also rounding up their terrified sheep, scratching their heads in confusion as they wondered what had happened the previous evening. After discovering that tens of thousands of sheep had seemingly lost their minds, farmers ruled out what had initially been the most feasible explanation: that their farms had been sabotaged by troublemakers. On an individual basis, this would have been possible, but for so many farms to have been targeted simultaneously, and for no obvious reason, seemed improbable. As surmised by the Times, who wrote that malicious mischief was out of the question because 1,000 men could not have frightened and released all these sheep. In desperation, 2 local farmers wrote to the editor of the Hardwick Science Gossip magazine, hoping someone might be able to offer an explanation for the strange incident. I beg to call attention to a remarkable circumstance which occurred in this immediate locality on the night of Saturday, November 3rd. At a time as near 8 o'clock as possible, the tens of thousands of sheep folded in the large sheep breeding districts, north, east, and west of Reading, were taken with a sudden fright, jumping their hurdles, escaping from the fields, and running hither and thither. In fact, there must for some time have been a perfect stampede. Early on Sunday morning, the shepherds found the animals under hedges and in the roads, panting as if they had been terror-stricken. The extent of the occurrence may be judged when we mention that every large farmer from Wallingford on the one hand to Twyford on the other has reported that his sheep were similarly frightened, and it is also noteworthy that with 2 or 3 exceptions, the hill country north of the Thames seems to have been principally affected. We have not heard, nor can any of the farmers give any reasonable explanation of the facts we have described. The night was intensely dark, with occasional flashes of lightning, but we scarcely think the latter circumstance would account for such a widespread effect. We would suggest the probability of a slight earthquake being the cause, but perhaps you or some of the readers of Science Gossip may be able to offer a more satisfactory explanation. No explanation was forthcoming. The following year, the incident was repeated in much the same area, and again 4 years later, with the epicenter of the attack once more in Oxfordshire. This time the effects were also felt further afield. On the night of December 4, 1893, another very remarkable panic among sheep occurred in the northern and middle parts of Oxfordshire, extending into adjoining parts of the counties of Warwick, Gloucester, and Berks. Individual farmers, on finding the next morning that their sheep had broken out during the night, and observing that the condition of the pens and hurdles, as well as of the sheep themselves in some cases, pointed to the fact of the sheep having been severely frightened, naturally concluded that they had been worried by a dog. Some, finding that the sheep exhibited no marks of being worried, concluded that they had only been frightened, perhaps by a dog, perhaps by a fox. Others applied to the police. The result of any inquiries made by the police, or privately, or by mentioning the fact among neighbors, however, was to elicit the fact that the panic had extended over a very large tract of country, and that unless it was allowed that all the dogs and foxes in the district had with concerted action simultaneously arisen and attacked hundreds of flocks on the same night, this attempt to account for the panic would have to be abandoned. The panic was then attributed by all flock owners to some atmospheric or meteoric cause, or to an earthquake, but with no human witnessing or hearing a meteor explode, or feeling an earthquake. Farmers were once again left baffled. The theory that was finally settled on during a later investigation was one that the farmers had already mentioned previously, but only in passing. A standalone event, it hadn't even been considered. Far from the tremors of a minor earthquake or a startling vision in the sky, it was concluded that the sheep had been sent into a panic by something as simple as the dark. From the description that would later be written in the 1921 edition of Nature, this was a darkness like no other. Combined with flocks of sheep, known for their nervous nature and herding instinct, it had proved an unfortunate combination to say the least. Very few people, probably, have ever been out in a really dark night, and it is impossible for anyone who has not had this experience to imagine what it is like and the sense of helplessness it causes. That a thick darkness of this kind was experienced in the early part of the night of the recent panic was proved by abundant evidence. One report said that it was between 8 and 9 p.m. when such a thick and heavy darkness came on that a man could not see his own hand. Another witness wrote that a little before 8 o'clock there was an extraordinary black cloud traveling from northwest to southeast, which appeared to be rolling along the ground. The darkness lasted for 30 or 40 minutes, and during that time it was like being shut up in a dark room. Later in the night, long after the panics, there were several flashes of lightning. They would all make a rush, and their terror and the momentarily recurring incentives too, and aggravations of it in the shape of collisions would only subside when the sheep had broken out and were in the open, clear of one another and of their troughs and hurdles. If this is the explanation of the panic, then it is easy to understand why folded sheep are so much more likely to suffer than those lying in open fields. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere accompanying the thick darkness, the susceptibility of sheep to atmospheric disturbance, and their nervous and timid dispositions would all tend to increase the fright the sheep experienced. The cause of the panic being a cloud rolling along so low down as to touch the ground, the tops of the hills and the high-lying ground would naturally be most affected. And this is observed to be the case, although locally the usual direction followed by thunderstorms has indicated a line along which sheep stampeded on nearly every farm.